England minus 1066. After the victory at Fulford, York surrendered. After briefly occupying the city and taking hostages and supplies from the city, Harald Hardrada returned to his ships at Rickle. He offered peace to the Northumbrians in exchange for their support of Hardrada's bid for the throne and demanded additional hostages from all over Yorkshire. The agreement was that these hostages were to be handed over at Stamford Bridge, a point between the city and Rickle, where several roads met at the bridge over the River Derwent. On September 25th, Viking army arrived at Stamford Bridge, where they set up camp, leaving the ships in Rickle. Harald Hardrada established outposts on the western bank of the river and commenced the wait for the hostages. Soon after his arrival at the rendezvous, Harald Hardrada was surprised by the appearance on the far bank of the River Derwent of King Harold, with his housecarls and the English troops he had assembled during his 4-day march from London to Stamford Bridge. In the course of his rapid journey north, King Harold had sent messengers in advance, warning the local magnates of his arrival and the need for a substantial force of troops to meet Harald Hardrada's Vikings. Harald Hardrada's army, in camp on the eastern bank of the River Derwent, was taken by surprise, unprepared for battle, many without their armor or weapons. Messengers were dispatched to Harald Hardrada's camp to notify him of the approaching English army. Messengers were dispatched to Harald Hardrada's camp to notify him of the approaching English army. When Harald Hardrada get info about the approaching English army, he sent messengers to his subordinate, Eystein Orr, to bring up the reserve guarding the ships at Rickle, and myself start prepare army for battle and go to of the bridge. Simultaneously, the Saxons advanced toward the bridge, a crucial crossing they needed to reach in order to assail the main Viking army, hastily assembling on the far bank. King Harold's passage across the bridge was held up for some time by a single Viking berserker who struck down every Saxon trying to pass him. The berserker, fueled by an uncontrollable rage, stood as a formidable obstacle on the bridge. His swift and deadly strikes created a barrier that temporarily halted King Harold's advance and disrupted the cohesion of the Saxon forces. The Saxon warriors, though determined, found themselves confronted by a relentless force in the form of the berserker, Each attempt to breach the bridge was met with a fierce defense, as the Viking warrior skillfully wielded his weapon, leaving a trail of fallen Saxons in his wake. King Harold, observing the unfolding challenge, realized the urgency of overcoming this singular but formidable adversary. The fate of the entire passage across the bridge and, by extension, the upcoming battle hung in the balance. The berserker was finally neutralized by a Saxon maneuvering a swill tub under the bridge and spearing the Viking through a gap in the walkway, allowing the Saxon army to pour across the bridge and prepare for attack Harald Hardrada's unprepared army. The main body of the Norwegian army formed a shield wall. To resist the British attack, Harold's army, after crossing the bridge, lined up close to the Norwegian army, closed their shields. Both armies were infantry forces, fighting on foot. Such armor as was worn comprised shirts or long tunics of chainmail. Those soldiers that could afford them wore pot helmets. Some with a nose-piece. Long shields were carried. Weapons were spears, swords and axes, with sharpened agricultural tools for the peasant soldiers. After some time, the Saxons start to attack Harald Hardrada's unprepared army. The element of surprise was now in favor of the Saxons, who pressed forward with determination, seizing the opportunity to exploit the momentary disarray of their adversaries. Harald Hardrada, realizing the gravity of the situation, swiftly rallied his troops, bellowing orders to regroup and meet the Saxon onslaught. The clash intensified as the two forces collided on the battlefield, the din of battle drowning out all other sounds. The unpreparedness of the Viking army posed a significant challenge, but their seasoned warriors quickly adapted to the changing circumstances. Fierce skirmishes erupted across the field, as axes clashed against swords and shields bore the brunt of the relentless attacks. Harald Hardrada, a veteran of many battles, strategically maneuvered his forces to regain control and stem the tide of the Saxon assault. The battlefield became a chaotic tableau of warriors, locked in mortal combat, each side vying for supremacy. The conflict extended well beyond the confines of the bridge, and despite persisting 4 hours, the Norse army's imprudent choice to abandon their armor placed them at a notable disadvantage. Eventually, the Norse army began to fragment and fracture, allowing the English troops to force their way in and break up the shield wall. Now completely outflanked, the Norse forces found themselves in a dire predicament. The English troops, seizing the advantage, exploited the vulnerability created by the fractured shield wall. Hardrada was killed with an arrow to his windpipe. The fall of Hardrada dealt a severe blow to the morale of the Norse army. The absence of their formidable leader left a leadership void at a critical juncture in the battle. With the news of Hardrada's death spreading among the Norse warriors, a sense of desperation began to permeate their ranks. The once unified front started to crumble further as individual soldiers, lacking centralized command, grappled with the unfolding chaos. Eventually, Hastings arrived with the rearguard, but it was too late. The Viking army, now leaderless, was beaten and slaughtered by the victorious Saxons. Their counterattack, described in the Norwegian tradition as Or's Storm, stopped the English advance temporarily, but was soon overwhelmed and Or was slain. The Norwegian army was routed. A truce was accepted by King Harald with the surviving Norwegians, including Harald's son Olaf and Paul Thorfinnsson, Earl of Orkney. They were allowed to leave after giving pledges not to attack England again. The losses Hardrada's forces had suffered were so severe that only 24 ships from the fleet of over 300 were needed to carry the survivors away. They withdrew to Orkney, where they spent the winter, and in the spring Olaf returned to Norway. King Harald's losses were heavy, particularly among his housecarls, leaving him to recruit a further army to confront Duke William of Normandy at next the Battle of Hastings after some days.